Man, when you discover that a woman has cheated on you, the first question that may come to your mind is, how could she do that and then act as if nothing happened? You may expect to see confusion in her eyes, notice fear and regret in the way she speaks, or sense that she is struggling with the weight of what she has done. But sometimes, the exact opposite happens. She may appear calm, continue living her life normally, speak to you with confidence, and perhaps even behave as though you are the one overreacting. And that is precisely what can make infidelity so confusing for a man. But there is an important point you need to understand. Being calm does not necessarily mean that there is no inner conflict. And cheating is certainly not behavior exclusive to women. However, when some women cheat, they may use psychological mechanisms that help them live with their decision and reduce their feelings of guilt. Instead of telling herself, "I cheated on the man who trusted me," she may reconstruct the story in her mind in a completely different way. "I only did this because I felt neglected." Or, "He changed toward me before I changed toward him." Or, "I needed attention and I wasn't getting it in my relationship." And this is where a very important psychological process begins, justifying the behavior instead of confronting it. Human beings in general struggle to accept that they have committed an action that conflicts with the image they have of themselves. So the mind may search for a reason that makes the behavior seem less wrong, or makes it appear to be a logical consequence of what happened in the relationship. In her internal narrative, cheating may gradually shift from being a decision I made to something circumstances pushed me into. And that difference is significant, because when she sees herself as a victim of neglect, emotional distance, constant conflict, or a lack of attention, she may begin to feel that her responsibility for the decision is smaller. As these thoughts are repeated, the story she tells herself can become more convincing than the reality of what actually happened. And what is even more important is that some of these justifications may not begin after the affair. They can start long before it. A woman may begin reevaluating her relationship, collecting every situation that hurt her, bringing up old arguments, comparing her partner to other people, and telling herself that the relationship no longer gives her what she needs. Over time, these thoughts can become an internal justification that makes crossing boundaries feel less serious to her. And here, man, you need to pay attention to something important. Understanding the psychology behind justification does not mean justifying the cheating itself. A relationship can be full of problems. One partner can genuinely feel neglected, lonely, unappreciated, or emotionally disconnected. But those feelings do not make cheating inevitable. A person can communicate, ask for change, establish boundaries, or end the relationship before becoming involved with someone else. But when someone chooses to cheat, they may later need an internal story that helps them accept their decision. That is why, in this video, we will uncover some of the most common psychological ways that certain women may use to justify infidelity to themselves, why a woman may sometimes appear extremely calm after cheating, and how the mind can transform feelings of guilt into the belief that she was forced into it or that she had her reasons. Most importantly, you will understand why you should never measure genuine remorse solely by her calmness or outward behavior. Excuse number 1. You don't appreciate me anymore. Man, when you try to understand how some women may justify their infidelity, you will find that one of the most common narratives begins with a sentence that sounds very simple on the surface. "I cheated because you stopped appreciating me." You no longer tell her the sweet things you used to say at the beginning of the relationship. You no longer notice the little details about her. You no longer surprise her with gifts or flowers. You no longer ask her how her day was, and you no longer make her feel the same way you once did, that she was desired, valued, and important to you. And over time, these small things may turn into an entire explanation in her mind for what happened. So she tells herself, "What did you expect from me? You neglected me for so long." But this is where you need to pause for a moment. If she truly felt unappreciated, why didn't she communicate with you openly? Why didn't she tell you that she needed more attention? Why didn't she explain that something had changed in her feelings? Why didn't she give the relationship a genuine chance to heal before looking for that feeling in someone else? These questions may be painful, but they are important. Feeling neglected can explain that there was a problem in the relationship, but it does not make cheating an inevitable consequence of that problem. And what makes this even more complicated is what can happen inside a person's mind after the decision has already been made. How does neglect become a justification? The story may begin with genuinely real situations. Maybe you forgot an important anniversary. Maybe you failed to notice a change in her appearance. Maybe you were consumed by work and didn't give her enough of your time. Maybe you were late to an occasion that mattered to her, or perhaps you simply became less expressive with your emotions as the years passed. Each of these situations may seem insignificant on its own, but when they are collected together in memory, they can become a long list of grievances. And she may begin looking at the past differently. Instead of remembering the entire relationship with all its details, she may begin focusing primarily on the moments when she felt hurt. Every incident becomes another piece of evidence that you didn't appreciate her, and every disappointment becomes another piece of the story she is constructing in her mind. Then she reaches a conclusion that may seem completely logical to her. I tried so hard, but he never changed. And this is where something more dangerous can happen. She may stop seeing the affair as a separate decision that she made and start seeing it as the consequence of what her partner did throughout that period. As if her mind is telling her, I didn't simply choose to cheat. I ended up here because of what happened to me. This way of thinking reduces her sense of personal responsibility because it shifts the center of the story from what did I do to what did he do to me. Then another man enters the picture. At this stage, someone else may appear and give her exactly what she feels she has been missing. He pays attention to the little details about her. He checks on her constantly. He compliments her appearance. He listens to her problems. He sends her sweet messages. He makes her feel desired and special. And suddenly, she has an easy comparison. Look at the difference between him and you. The other man may not actually be better than you in every way, but in that particular moment, he gives her the feeling she has been searching for. And that makes it easier to construct another justification in her mind. I'm not cheating just for the sake of cheating. I simply found someone who gives me what I needed. As this idea is repeated, cheating can gradually transform in her mind from an act she knows crossed a boundary into something she perceives as reclaiming an emotional need she had been deprived of. And this is the part a man needs to understand clearly. A justification is not necessarily the truth. Maybe you really did neglect her. Maybe you failed to express your love. Maybe the relationship had reached a stage filled with emotional distance, coldness, and problems. You can take responsibility for all of that without accepting the idea that your mistakes somehow made her infidelity justified. There is a huge difference between saying, I made mistakes in the relationship and I should have been more attentive, and saying, because I made mistakes, I deserve to be cheated on. The first is an acknowledgement of responsibility. The second is an attempt to erase the other person's responsibility for their own decision. So when you hear a woman say, I cheated because you stopped appreciating me, don't treat that sentence as the complete explanation for what happened. It may reveal a real problem that existed within the relationship, but it does not tell the entire story. A relationship can be repaired through communication. Attention can be requested. Boundaries can be established. And if staying together becomes too painful, the relationship can even be ended. But cheating is a different decision. And most importantly, do not allow your guilt over your own mistakes to turn into the belief that you deserve to be betrayed. You can have failed as a partner in certain ways without being responsible for another person's decision to cheat on you. Excuse number 2, there were no feelings. It was just physical attraction. Man, there is another justification that some people may turn to when trying to live with infidelity, separating emotions from physical behavior. The idea begins with a statement that, on the surface, seems to minimize what happened. I didn't love the other person, so what happened didn't mean anything. She may tell herself, I still love my husband. I never became emotionally attached to the other man. I never thought about leaving my relationship. It was just a moment of attraction. I didn't have any real feelings for him. In this way, the definition of infidelity in her mind shifts from violating the trust and agreement between two partners to something entirely different. Was there love or not? And if the answer is no, she may feel that what happened was less serious and perhaps not consider it emotional betrayal in the way she fears it would be perceived. But the problem is that the absence of feelings does not erase the existence of a decision. The other relationship may have involved no love whatsoever. There may have been no intention of building a future with the other person. And yet, if the couple had agreed to be exclusive, crossing those boundaries still constitutes a violation of the relationship. How does this justification work inside the mind? When a person feels guilty about behavior that conflicts with the way they see themselves, they may look for a way to reduce that internal contradiction. Instead of thinking, I am in a committed relationship and I violated the trust that existed between us, the thought may become, I still love my partner, so what happened doesn't change the reality of our relationship. And this is where two things become separated, love on one side and behavior on the other. She may consider herself emotionally loyal because she still loves her husband, lives with him, plans a future with him, cares about his family, and shares her life with him. As for what happened outside the relationship, she places it in a completely separate category, as if it were simply a passing event that has nothing to do with her identity as a wife. This can give the mind a great deal of relief because she can preserve a positive image of herself without having to confront the full contradiction between what she believes and what she did. I didn't betray him emotionally. That sentence may become the key to the entire justification. She may believe that real betrayal begins when she falls in love with someone else, starts thinking about leaving the relationship, or begins to value the other person more than her partner. But if none of those things happened, she may say, my real relationship is still with my husband. From her perspective, the other person becomes nothing more than a temporary experience that does not threaten her primary relationship. But it is important here to distinguish between explaining behavior and justifying it. Attraction, curiosity, loneliness, or feelings of neglect may help explain why someone crossed a boundary, but they do not change the fact that every relationship has its own boundaries and agreements. If there was a clear agreement of fidelity, then feelings alone are not the only measure. Why is this justification so comforting? Because it allows her to hold on to everything she loves about her life without having to confront the contradiction. She can say, I love my husband. And at the same time, what happened with someone else meant nothing. This allows her to avoid redefining herself as someone who betrayed her partner. Instead, she can place what happened into categories such as a moment of weakness, a passing mistake, a mistake separate from my real relationship. And she may genuinely believe this narrative. It does not necessarily mean she is pretending in front of other people. That is what makes understanding infidelity from a psychological perspective so complicated. A person does not always need to invent an entire lie to escape guilt. Sometimes, all they need to do is reinterpret the event in a way their mind can live with. But there is a more important question. Man, when you hear the statement, there were no feelings, so it wasn't really cheating. Don't immediately get pulled into an argument about how much she loves you. The more important question is, was there an agreement of fidelity within the relationship? And was that agreement violated? Because love does not erase boundaries, and the absence of love for the other person does not erase the impact of the decision. You can love someone and still cheat on them. You can have absolutely no love for the other person and still violate the trust upon which your relationship was built. That is why the statement, there was no love, may explain how some women view what happened, but it does not necessarily mean that what happened was harmless, or that the betrayed partner has no right to consider it infidelity. And what is even more interesting is that this type of justification can continue for a long time, especially when a woman successfully convinces herself that her primary emotional relationship has not changed. She may say, I still choose you. And from her perspective, that statement may genuinely be true. But for the man, the question is not only, does she still love me? It is also, did she respect the boundaries we agreed upon? And did the trust between us mean the same thing to her as it did to me? And this is where the most important truth emerges. Infidelity is not measured only by the strength of someone's feelings toward the other person. It is also measured by the trust, boundaries, and agreements that govern the relationship. So when a woman uses this justification, she may not necessarily have convinced herself that she did absolutely nothing wrong. She may have convinced herself of something more specific. What I did does not change the fact that my primary relationship is with you. And that belief, specifically, may allow some people to live with infidelity without experiencing the level of guilt that their partner might expect. Excuse number 3, you're not perfect either. Man, when it becomes difficult for some women to confront the reality of their infidelity, another, more complicated justification may appear, shifting the focus away from what they did and toward the mistakes you made. Instead of the question remaining, why did you cheat? The conversation gradually becomes, what about the things you did? She may tell you, Yes, I crossed the boundaries of our relationship, but you made mistakes too. You look at other women. I saw you talking to your female coworker in a friendly way. You like other women's pictures. You don't give me the attention I deserve. You've made me feel jealous and hurt too. And this is where a very important psychological shift takes place. She is no longer necessarily trying to prove that cheating was right. Instead, she may be trying to prove that you are not in a position to judge her. As if the message has become, maybe I made a mistake, but you made mistakes before me too, so you can't blame me alone. Why is this justification so comforting? Because it reduces the psychological pressure that comes with taking full responsibility. If a woman admits that she made a mistake without looking for an equivalent mistake on your part, she has to confront a series of difficult questions. Why did you do it? Why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't you end the relationship if you were unhappy? Why did you cross the boundaries we agreed upon? And did you know that you were going to hurt the person who trusted you? But once she finds something you did wrong, it becomes easier to move the conversation somewhere else. You hurt me too. And suddenly, the discussion is no longer only about the infidelity. It becomes a discussion about the entire history of the relationship. She may begin bringing up situations from the distant past that you may have completely forgotten. The time you looked at another woman on the street. The time you complimented a female coworker. The time you liked another woman's picture. The time you came home late without explaining why. The time you became jealous and she didn't understand why. The time you failed to notice that she had changed her hairstyle. Each of these situations can become another piece of evidence in a mental case she is building against you. Then comes the process of collecting evidence. In some cases, these incidents may not have seemed important when they actually happened. But after the affair, they may be completely reinterpreted. A glance becomes attraction. A like becomes interest. A compliment becomes flirting. Coming home late from work becomes a possible sign of cheating. And normal communication with another woman may become emotional infidelity. Over time, an internal narrative begins to form. He wasn't loyal to me in the way I needed him to be either. Then, when you confront her about the cheating, she may bring the entire list out at once. And what about you? What about everything you did? Notice the difference. She is no longer discussing whether she cheated or not. She has shifted the conversation toward whether you are better than she is. And this is a very important psychological distinction. If I made mistakes, then you made mistakes too. In her mind, the situation may start to resemble a scorecard. You hurt her in one situation. She hurt you in another. You made her feel jealous. She made you feel betrayed. You didn't give her enough attention. She looked for that attention somewhere else. And gradually, the mind begins constructing a dangerous idea. We're even. But are the actions really equal? That depends on the nature of the behavior and the agreements within each relationship. Not every glance, like, or compliment constitutes infidelity, and boundaries differ from one relationship to another. At the same time, one person's mistake cannot automatically be used to justify the other person's violation of an agreed-upon boundary. You may have made mistakes in the relationship. You may have fallen short. You may have caused her pain. And you can even take full responsibility for those mistakes. But that does not automatically mean that the other person is no longer responsible for their own decisions. And this is where the fallacy appears. She may tell you, if you had treated me better, this never would have happened. And perhaps your behavior really did need to change. But there is a difference between saying, there were problems between us that contributed to the deterioration of the relationship, and saying, because of your mistakes, my cheating became justified. The first is an acknowledgement of a shared relationship problem. The second is a transfer of responsibility. If she was unhappy, she could have confronted you. She could have said, I no longer feel secure in this relationship. Or, your attention has changed, and I can't keep living like this. Or even, if things continue this way, I won't be able to stay. There were many ways to confront the problem before crossing the boundaries. But once the cheating happens, the decision remains hers. The most dangerous part, using your mistakes as a license. Some justifications don't simply say, you made mistakes too. They go further. Therefore, I had the right to make mistakes too. And this is where the concept of fairness becomes distorted. The relationship starts to resemble a competition. Who made more mistakes? Who started first? Who caused the most pain? Who deserves to be held accountable? But healthy relationships do not work that way. If you made a mistake, you should take responsibility for your mistake. If she made a mistake, she should take responsibility for hers. Two wrongs do not automatically create equality, and they do not erase each other. So if you find yourself in a situation where your mistakes are being used to explain your partner's infidelity, try not to fall into the psychological trap of defending yourself on 20 different issues while forgetting the original question. You can say, "I'm willing to acknowledge everything I did wrong. I'm willing to discuss it and take responsibility for it. But my mistakes do not make your decision to cheat a decision that I made." And that may be the most important point about this type of justification. Because acknowledging that you are not a perfect partner does not mean you have to accept the idea that you deserve to be cheated on. You may have made mistakes in love, attention, communication, or in understanding her feelings. But none of that automatically gives either partner permission to violate the boundaries they agreed upon. Excuse number 4, I didn't plan it. It just happened. Man, another justification that may appear when some women try to live with infidelity without fully confronting their responsibility is describing what happened as an accident or an unintended moment of weakness. You may hear statements such as, "I didn't plan it. I didn't go there intending to cheat. Things developed in a way I didn't expect. I was drinking and I wasn't fully in control of myself. I never thought things would go that far. I don't know how everything happened so quickly." And here, the meaning of infidelity within the story she tells begins to resemble something that simply happened to her, rather than something she participated in creating. As if she is saying, "I didn't wake up that day and decide to cheat on you. A series of things simply happened, and eventually I found myself in a situation I never intended to be in." And this interpretation can be extremely comforting psychologically, because it softens the most uncomfortable question, "Why did you choose to do it?" and replaces it with another question, "How did things get this far?" The difference between these two questions is enormous. The first focuses on choice and responsibility. The second focuses on circumstances and chance. How does the story usually begin? It may begin in a completely ordinary way. A meeting with a coworker, a social gathering, a party with friends, a few exchanged messages, a long conversation, jokes and laughter, then a drink or two. Then the conversation becomes more personal. And gradually, the boundaries that were clear at the beginning begin to disappear. She may tell herself, "We're just talking." Then, "He's just a friend." Then, "There's nothing between us." Then, "I'm just enjoying the attention." And eventually, she may find herself in a situation that is far more intimate than she ever intended to reach. At that point, instead of looking at the chain of small decisions that led her there, she may focus only on the ending and say, "I don't know how this happened." But the more complicated psychological reality is that major decisions do not always begin with one major decision. Sometimes they begin with a series of small decisions. The decision to continue a conversation that could have been ended. The decision to hide messages. The decision to meet someone she knows is attracted to her. The decision to accept attention that goes beyond the boundaries of friendship. The decision to go somewhere private with him. Then another decision after that. And another. That is why the statement, "I never intended for it to become cheating," may be true in one sense. There may genuinely have been no plan from the beginning. But the absence of a premeditated plan does not necessarily mean the absence of choices. "But I was drinking." Here, another justification connected to the idea of an accident may appear. She may say, "I had too much to drink and I wasn't thinking clearly." Alcohol can indeed affect judgment and reduce a person's ability to make sound decisions. But using it as a complete explanation for what happened can become a way of reducing personal responsibility. Instead of saying, "I knew I was crossing the boundaries of my relationship, but I continued," the narrative becomes, "I wasn't in my normal state, so it happened." As if alcohol itself made the decision. But in many situations, infidelity does not happen within a single second. There is often a series of moments in which a person can step back, stop the situation, leave the place, or remember the partner waiting for them at home. So the question is not only, "Was there a moment when you lost control?" It is also, "What happened before that moment?" "I thought we were just going to talk." You may hear another version of the story. "He was just a coworker. He gave me a ride home. I asked him to stop somewhere. We went out for coffee. We were just talking. And then suddenly, I don't know how we got to this point." This statement makes it sound as though the events were moving forward on their own, as if the person had no ability to stop them. But in relationships, boundaries do not always disappear suddenly. Sometimes they are crossed through very small steps until turning back becomes increasingly difficult. And this is where the danger of this justification lies. It allows someone to focus only on the final step while ignoring all the steps that came before it. Why is this justification so comforting? Because it protects the person's image of themselves. Psychologically, it is much easier to say, "I'm not a cheating woman. I made a mistake in a moment of weakness." The second statement is much easier to live with than the first. Cheater becomes an identity. But a moment of weakness is simply a temporary event. And in this way, she can continue seeing herself as a wife who loves her partner, but simply went through a bad situation that is now over. She may even tell herself, "If I could go back in time, I would never do it." And that belief may help her reduce a significant part of the guilt she feels. But there is an important difference between not planning the infidelity and not taking responsibility for what happened. A person can make a mistake that was never planned and still admit, "I didn't plan for this to happen, but I was responsible for the decisions that led me there." That is far more mature than turning the entire event into nothing more than an accident. And the most important point for you as a man. If you are hearing this kind of explanation after being betrayed, it is completely understandable to feel angry when you hear, "I didn't mean for it to happen, it just happened." Because you may find yourself thinking, how can cheating just happen by itself? But instead of getting trapped in an endless argument over every individual detail, try to separate two things. She may genuinely not have planned to cheat from the beginning, and she may genuinely regret what happened. But that does not mean the infidelity was something that simply fell upon her from the sky without any decisions on her part. Circumstances may explain behavior, but they do not erase responsibility for it. And this applies to both men and women. No healthy relationship can depend on the idea that a person completely loses their ability to choose simply because the circumstances become tempting. Every relationship needs boundaries, and being faithful means recognizing when you are approaching those boundaries and knowing when you need to step back. So when you hear, "I didn't plan it, it just happened," the more important question may not be, "Did you plan to cheat from the beginning?" Instead, ask, "At what point did you realize that things were crossing the boundaries of our relationship, and why didn't you stop?" Because infidelity may not begin at the final moment. Sometimes it begins much earlier, at the moment when a person realizes that the path they are taking could lead to something that should not happen, and yet chooses to continue. And that is where the difference becomes clear between an event completely outside someone's control and a series of small choices that eventually led to an outcome they did not want to acknowledge. Excuse number 5. You're the one who pushed me to this point. Man, this justification is slightly different from the previous excuses because it doesn't merely attempt to reduce responsibility for the infidelity. It can go even further, placing the entire responsibility on the other partner. Instead of a woman saying, "I felt neglected, and that's why I made a mistake," the narrative can become, "You are the reason all of this happened." She may say, "You were always angry with me. You used to yell at me. You never listened when I talked. You dismissed my feelings. You made me feel unimportant. I kept asking you to change, but you never did. Then someone else came along and treated me the way I had always wished you would." And here, instead of the affair being a decision she made within a relationship that was full of problems, it becomes, in her version of the story, almost as though you forced her into it. As if the message has become, "I didn't cheat on you because I wanted to. You pushed me into cheating." This type of justification can be psychologically powerful because it allows a person to maintain the image of herself as the victim rather than confronting herself as responsible for a painful decision. How does this narrative develop in the mind? The relationship may genuinely have had serious problems. Frequent arguments, difficulty communicating, emotional neglect, anger, hurtful words, lack of attention, different ways of expressing love. All of these things can genuinely be painful, and they should not be dismissed. But the problem begins when all of these events are collected into one narrative, and that narrative becomes an explanation for everything. Instead of saying, "Our relationship became full of problems, and I didn't handle them properly," she may eventually reach the conclusion, "I was living in a relationship that left me unable to act any other way." And this changes the meaning of the infidelity. She no longer sees it as a choice. She sees it as a reaction. She no longer sees herself as the person who crossed the boundaries of the relationship. She sees herself as someone who is simply trying to survive a relationship that caused her pain. Then the mind begins rewriting the past. When a person needs to justify a decision they have made, they may begin focusing on evidence that supports their narrative while ignoring what contradicts it. She remembers every time you raised your voice, every time you ignored her, every time you failed to understand what she needed, every argument you had, every word she felt hurt by. But she may not remember those moments with the same intensity when you stood by her, helped her, or tried to repair the relationship. Not because those things never happened, but because when the mind is searching for justification, it can selectively focus on information that supports the story it wants to believe. Over time, your image in her mind may become worse than the reality actually was. You are no longer the man who sometimes made mistakes. You become the man who always hurt me. And she is no longer the woman who made a wrong decision. She becomes the woman who is simply trying to find a way out of her pain. Then someone else appears at exactly the right moment. And this is where things can become even more complicated. A new person enters her life and gives her something she feels she has been missing. A man who listens to her, asks about her day, checks on her, speaks to her calmly, compliments her, makes her feel desired and understood. After a while, a comparison may begin forming in her mind. Look at how this man treats me. Then, why didn't my husband treat me this way? And eventually, maybe this is the man I needed all along. At this stage, she may no longer see the new man as someone who entered an existing relationship and crossed its boundaries with her. Instead, she may see him as a rescuer. And this completely changes the meaning of the affair in her mind. It is no longer betrayal. It is escape. It is no longer cheating on her partner. It is survival from a painful relationship. It is no longer a choice to betray. It is reclaiming her right to happiness. And this shift in how the event is interpreted can significantly reduce feelings of guilt. I didn't betray you. I was escaping from you. This may be the deeper idea behind this type of justification. If she can convince herself that the original relationship was responsible for all her pain, then the other man becomes, in her eyes, simply a doorway to freedom. And the affair can gradually become almost like a heroic story inside her mind. I was unhappy, nobody listened to me, and then someone came along who made me feel valuable. In this narrative, the fact that she had other choices gradually disappears. She could have confronted the problems. She could have asked for help. She could have established clear boundaries. She could have ended the relationship if it had become impossible to continue. She could have said, I'm no longer happy in this relationship, so I'm leaving. But instead, she may choose to enter another relationship before ending the first one. And this is where you need to distinguish between two things. A relationship being unhealthy or painful, and infidelity being the result of genuine coercion. Serious problems within a relationship do not mean that cheating becomes the only available option. The most dangerous part, turning infidelity into justice. The idea may eventually become, after everything he did to me, what did he expect? And this is where the relationship can turn into a form of emotional retaliation. You hurt me, so I'll hurt you. You neglected me, so I'll find someone who cares about me. You made me feel undesirable, so I'll find a man who makes me feel desired. As if cheating has become a way of restoring balance. But the truth is that pain does not erase pain. If you made mistakes in the relationship, those mistakes are yours to take responsibility for. And if she cheated on you, that decision is hers to take responsibility for. You can be part of the problems that contributed to the breakdown of a relationship without being the person who made the decision to cheat on your behalf. And this is a very important point for a man. Do not allow your guilt over your own mistakes to make you take responsibility for a decision you did not make. You can say, yes, I was wrong when I yelled. Yes, I failed to listen to you. Yes, perhaps I made you feel unappreciated. But at the same time, you can say, you could have told me. You could have asked me to change. You could have ended the relationship. But the decision to enter another relationship was yours. That is not an attempt to escape responsibility. It is a fair distribution of responsibility. Because acknowledging your mistakes does not mean you have to accept the idea that you forced her to cheat. And ultimately, perhaps the most dangerous sentence in this type of justification is, If you had treated me differently, none of this would have happened. There may be some truth in the idea that the way you treated her affected the relationship. But that truth should not be transformed into a complete exemption from responsibility. A relationship can be unhealthy. It can be filled with pain. Both partners can fail to make it work. But when one partner chooses to cross its boundaries, that choice remains their responsibility. So, man, if you find yourself facing a woman who tells you, "You're the one who brought me to this point," don't ignore your own mistakes and don't waste your energy defending yourself against every single detail. But don't accept the idea that the entire story can be reduced to you forcing her to cheat either. Acknowledge what you did. Then leave her responsible for acknowledging what she did. Because a relationship may be the responsibility of two people, but each person remains responsible for the decisions they make when the relationship reaches its most difficult moments. Excuse number 6, everyone does it. So why should I be the exception? Man, there is another justification that can be even more dangerous than simply trying to find a personal excuse for cheating, because it doesn't say, "I did it because my relationship was bad." It goes much further. Cheating is normal anyway. Everyone does it. Once a person adopts this belief, defending infidelity becomes much easier because they no longer need to convince themselves that there was some specific reason that pushed them toward it. They only need to convince themselves that what happened was not unusual and is simply part of modern relationships. She may say, "What did you expect? Most people cheat. All my friends have similar stories." At work, everyone knows that some married people have other relationships. Even people who seem perfect aren't actually faithful. Then comes the statement that closes the entire circle of justification. "At least I'm not living a lie." At this point, infidelity is no longer viewed as something that deserves deep guilt. Instead, it becomes, in her mind, simply a fact of life. How does this way of thinking develop? Human beings are strongly influenced by what they see around them. If her circle of friends constantly talks about secret relationships as though they are completely normal, the process may begin with a simple thought. "It seems like this happens a lot." Then it becomes, "Maybe everyone does it." Then, "So there's nothing unusual about what I did." And eventually, the problem isn't cheating. The problem is that people pretend they don't cheat. Here, the mind has moved from simply observing that a behavior is common to using its prevalence as a way of morally justifying it. But the existence of a behavior within society does not automatically make it acceptable within every relationship. Lying may be common, but that does not make lying acceptable simply because many people do it. Cheating may exist everywhere, but that does not make it fair simply because others engage in it. In the same way, the prevalence of infidelity does not mean that everyone in a committed relationship considers cheating normal or acceptable. "All my friends do it." This is one of the strongest psychological mechanisms behind this type of justification. Instead of asking herself, "Does this align with the values and agreements within my relationship?" she may ask, "What are other people doing?" If her friend is having a secret affair, it feels less unusual. If her coworker is talking about another man, it seems more common. If she constantly hears stories about married people entering side relationships, she may gradually lose the sense that cheating is something exceptional. Over time, her standard changes. What once seemed like a serious violation becomes something that happens. And that particular phrase can be extremely powerful. It happens. Because it doesn't answer the question of whether something is right or wrong. It simply eliminates the question altogether. From "I did something wrong" to "that's just the way life is." Another psychological shift can happen here. At first, a woman may know that what she did conflicts with what she agreed upon with her husband. But instead of confronting that contradiction, she begins redefining infidelity itself. She may say, "A person can't realistically live with only one person for their entire life." Or, "Being attracted to other people is natural." And that is true in one sense. A person can experience attraction toward others while being in a committed relationship. But feeling attraction is one thing. Turning that attraction into a secret relationship is another. You can feel attracted to someone else without acting on it. You can find someone attractive without hiding conversations with them. And you can feel curious about another person without crossing the boundaries you agreed upon with your partner. So the issue is not always the existence of the feeling. It is the decision that comes after it. Monogamy is just a social construct. The justification can sometimes go even deeper. A woman may begin convincing herself that committing to one person for an entire lifetime is simply an idea imposed by society, and that human beings naturally need variety and different experiences. Therefore, if she desires someone else, she may see that desire itself as proof that the system she is living within is unrealistic. But there is an important distinction here. Some people genuinely choose non-monogamous relationships, but that is fundamentally different from secret infidelity. In an open or consensually non-monogamous relationship, there is clear consent and an understanding between the people involved. But when two people agree to an exclusive relationship and one person secretly maintains another relationship, the problem is not simply the presence of a third person. It is breaking the agreement without the other partner's knowledge or consent. And that is a fundamental difference. Why is this justification so comforting? Because it can eliminate guilt at its root. If cheating is an exceptional wrong, she has to confront herself. But if she convinces herself that everyone does it, she no longer feels that she has done anything fundamentally different from everyone else. She may even begin seeing herself as the realistic person who understands how life really works, while viewing the person who insists on fidelity as naive or overly idealistic. She may say, "You're living in an imaginary world that doesn't exist. You actually believe love means never being attracted to anyone else. I'm just more realistic than you." And this creates a strange reversal of roles. The person who honored the agreement becomes, in her eyes, the naive one. And the person who broke the agreement becomes the realistic one. But there is a simple question that exposes the contradiction. If cheating is really that normal and acceptable, why is it hidden? Why are messages deleted? Why are calls concealed? Why are passwords changed? Why are excuses invented? Why does someone feel the need to lie about where they are? These questions do not mean that every secret relationship automatically proves guilt, but they reveal an important contradiction in this type of justification. If the behavior were completely acceptable within the relationship, why would it need to be kept secret? And this is where the real issue appears. Being attracted to other people can be natural. Curiosity can be natural. A person can find someone else attractive even while married. But that does not mean that every action resulting from those feelings automatically becomes acceptable. Everyone cheats is not an answer. Man, if you hear this statement, remember that the prevalence of a behavior does not determine what it means within your relationship. Maybe some people cheat. Maybe some marriages fail. Maybe some people do not believe in monogamy at all. But the real question is not, what does everyone else do? The real question is, what did we agree to be within this relationship? If the agreement was fidelity, knowing that other people cheat does not change that agreement. And if a woman does not want a monogamous relationship, she has every right to choose a different relationship structure openly and honestly. The problem begins when she chooses something secretly while allowing her partner to believe that he is in an exclusive relationship. And ultimately, the statement, "everyone does it," may simply be a way of avoiding a much more uncomfortable question. Were you willing to tell me the truth before you did it? If the answer is no, then the issue is not simply desire or attraction. It is also about a lack of honesty, a broken agreement, and a breach of trust. Excuse number 7. I deserve to be happy. Man, there is another justification that may sound humane and understandable on the surface, but when it is used to justify infidelity, it can become a dangerous way of avoiding personal responsibility. It is the idea of, "I sacrificed so much, so now it's time to live for myself." A woman may say, "I spent years taking care of everyone. I had children and raised them. I worked and took care of the household. I always put my family's needs before my own. I gave up so many things for him." Then comes the sentence that changes everything. Don't I finally deserve to be happy? There is obviously nothing wrong with wanting happiness. Every human being has the right to seek a life in which they feel fulfilled, respected, and loved. But the problem begins when the idea of "I deserve to be happy" becomes a justification for cheating instead of a reason to honestly confront the relationship. The new relationship then becomes, in her mind, not an act of betrayal, but a reward. I gave everyone years of my life. Now I want something for myself. There may genuinely have been years of exhaustion and sacrifice. Perhaps she carried many responsibilities. Maybe she was responsible for the children, work, the household, and the family. Perhaps she had felt for a long time that her life had become a series of obligations with very little space left for herself. And over time, a deep sense of resentment can build. I do everything, but who takes care of me? Everyone takes something from me, but no one asks what I want. I lost myself while trying to make everyone else happy. Then, if someone new appears and gives her a different kind of attention, she may not simply see him as another man. She may see him as the door back to a version of herself that she feels she lost. A man who makes her feel beautiful, checks on her, listens to her, flirts with her, gives her a sense of excitement after years of routine. And suddenly, the new relationship becomes more than just a relationship. In her mind, it becomes a symbol of freedom, youth, attention, and the life she feels she was deprived of. And this is where the phrase begins. I deserve this. Infidelity becomes compensation. This is perhaps the most psychologically interesting part. Instead of telling herself, I am cheating on my partner, she may tell herself, I'm making up for everything I've been through. Notice the difference. In the first sentence, she is the person responsible for the decision. In the second, she sees herself as someone reclaiming something she was deprived of. As if all those years of sacrifice have become a balance sheet inside her mind. I sacrificed here. I gave something up there. I endured this. I was patient with that. And now it's time to receive the reward. The other man may become part of that reward in her perception. Not necessarily because she no longer loves her husband, but because she may have convinced herself that loving him should not prevent her from pursuing her own happiness. I still love my husband, but I want to live. And this creates a major contradiction. A woman may be able to hold two seemingly conflicting beliefs at the same time. I love my husband. And at the same time, I want another man. How can these two ideas coexist? Through separation. She may tell herself that her husband represents family, stability, history, and security, while the other man represents excitement, attention, and feeling alive. In this way, she may stop seeing the other relationship as a threat to her primary relationship. She may say, I don't even want to leave my husband. I just want something for myself. And this is where the affair becomes, in her mind, like a private space separate from the marriage. But the problem is that the other partner may never have agreed to this arrangement. If he believes he is in an exclusive relationship, the existence of a secret relationship fundamentally changes the agreement. Why might the guilt become weaker? Because the mind can redefine the woman's identity. She no longer sees herself as a wife who cheated on her husband. Instead, she sees herself as a woman who sacrificed for years and finally decided to do something for herself. And that narrative is much easier to live with. She doesn't have to see herself as a bad person. She may even see herself as someone who is finally brave enough to choose herself. She may say, for the first time in years, I'm doing something that makes me happy. And in this way, guilt can gradually transform into a feeling of liberation. But we should also be fair here. Feeling exhausted, neglected, or like you have lost yourself within a marriage can be very real. But those feelings do not make cheating the only solution. She could have demanded change. She could have established boundaries. She could have sought help. She could have rebuilt her life in a different way. And if she no longer wanted the marriage, she could have ended it before beginning another relationship. There are also smaller justifications that can branch off from these. Sometimes justifications do not come in the form of one big explanation. Instead, they appear as a collection of small statements that make each violation seem less serious. She may say, I didn't even enjoy it, so it doesn't really count as cheating. As if the seriousness of betrayal depends on how much she enjoyed it. Or, we were fighting at the time, so it was almost as if we weren't together anyway. As if an argument temporarily suspends the boundaries of a relationship. Or, I was thinking about my husband the entire time. As if thinking about your partner while crossing the boundaries of the relationship somehow erases what happened. Or, it happened a long time ago, so why are you still talking about it? As if the passage of time erases the impact of broken trust. Or, I never intended to leave my husband for him. As if not wanting to end the marriage means the secret relationship was not infidelity. All of these statements have one thing in common. They attempt to change the meaning of the action instead of confronting the action itself. So why might some women appear calm after cheating? Man, this is a very important point. We cannot know what is happening inside another person simply by looking at how calm they appear. A woman who seems calm may be regretful, frightened, confused, or she may genuinely have convinced herself that what she did was justified. But in some cases, when justification is repeated over and over inside the mind, the person may experience less internal conflict. She may have an entire story. He didn't appreciate me. There were no feelings. He made mistakes too. It happened without me planning it. He pushed me into it. Everyone does it. I deserve to be happy. And after these thoughts are repeated enough, it may become easier for her to live with the decision without experiencing the same level of guilt that her partner expects. But this is not a rule that applies to every woman or every case of infidelity. Men and women alike can use similar psychological mechanisms to justify behavior that hurts their partners. The bottom line, the problem is not just the excuse. When you look at these 7 justifications together, you will notice something important. Each excuse attempts to change the question. Instead of, "Did you cross the boundaries of the relationship?" it becomes, "Didn't you fail to give me the attention I deserved?" Instead of, "Did cheating happen?" it becomes, "Were there any feelings involved?" Instead of, "Why did you do it?" it becomes, "Weren't you wrong too?" Instead of, "Was this a decision?" it becomes, "Wasn't it just an accident?" Instead of, "Why did she cheat?" it becomes, "Weren't you the reason she did it?" Instead of, "Is cheating acceptable?" it becomes, "Doesn't everyone do it?" And finally, "Why did she cheat?" becomes, "Doesn't she deserve to be happy?" And this is how the focus shifts from the action and responsibility towards circumstances, emotions, and justifications. So, what are the 7 justifications we discussed? The first, "You don't appreciate me anymore." Infidelity becomes a reaction to neglect and a lack of attention. The second, "It was just physical attraction." Infidelity becomes something separate from love and emotional attachment. The third, "You're not perfect either." Your mistakes become a justification that makes her feel as though the score is even. The fourth, "It was an accident. I didn't mean for it to happen." Infidelity is transformed from a decision into an unintended consequence of circumstances. The fifth, "You're the one who pushed me to this point." She shifts from being responsible for her choice to seeing herself as a victim who was pushed into reaching that point. The sixth, "Everyone does it." Infidelity becomes normal in her mind rather than an exception that should create guilt. The seventh, "I deserve to be happy." Infidelity becomes a reward or compensation for years of sacrifice and exhaustion. And in the end, man, the most important thing you need to understand is that a justification does not necessarily mean the person is unaware of what happened. It may simply mean that they have found a way to live with it. A person may have done something wrong but not want to see themselves as a bad person. So they construct a story that helps them preserve their self-image. And that story can be different from one person to another. But ultimately, it often serves the same purpose: reducing internal conflict and easing feelings of guilt. However, do not let this understanding lead you to believe that every woman who cheats thinks this way, or that appearing calm is definite proof that she feels no remorse. You cannot know what is happening inside another person that simply. But if you are the person who is betrayed, there is a more important lesson than trying to decode every excuse. Do not take responsibility for someone else's decision. If you made mistakes in the relationship, acknowledge them. If you fell short, correct what you can. If you neglected your partner, take responsibility for that. But do not confuse your mistakes as a partner with the other person's decision to cross the boundaries of the relationship. Because you can be an imperfect partner and still not be responsible for a betrayal you did not choose.